I'm gonna call it right now. This is easily the best looking ute in its class. I mean, look at this interior. It just exudes premium, although there is a lot of plastic going on.
Now, as I'm sure you're aware, underneath the exterior here, there's a whole lot of Nissan Navara going on. Now, I'm a mechanic and I own a Nissan Navara, and therefore you'd think the X-Class would be reliable, right? Well, some of them have Mercedes engines, so how does that go?
Compared to plenty of other Mercedes models that we've tested of late, this just feels so much more solid. Okay, so what we have here is a German brand's design language bolted to a car from a Japanese manufacturer, although it is made in Spain. Is that a recipe for disaster, or is it automotive multiculturalism working at its finest? Mercedes-Benz obviously comes with a tray full of schmancy brand appeal, but the brand's build quality and reliability of late maybe doesn't match the hype. The Navara, that's hiding under the sheet metal, is known to be a tough and dependable workhorse of a ute. But over the last few years, Nissan have been in the worst financial situation the company has ever experienced. And thanks to hardly anyone buying these, the depreciation has been immense. So, are these an absolute used car bargain or just a dodgy old ute that you should avoid at all costs? To answer that, let's get into the bad news first. The whole reason that you buy a vehicle like this is to be a work vehicle or maybe use it as a family car. And look, it's fantastic that, like a Volkswagen Amarok and unlike plenty of other dual cab utes on the market, these can fit a full-size Aussie pallet. However, quite a few owners have had issues with the latch mechanism here failing, and this means the tailgate can fall down unexpectedly. And obviously this isn't great when you're driving up a hill and all your tools go flying out the back or your kids' bikes go disappearing down the road, or the opposite happens and this handle just fails to work at all and just becomes purely a display piece and you can't actually get into the tailgate. But potentially good news here, these are relatively easy to fix. But a hot tip from both us and the owners, and this actually goes for plenty of components on the car, do not buy any of the spare parts from Mercedes-Benz because they might try to charge you a small fortune. See, this is exactly the same handle that you'll find on the back of a Nissan Navara. So why not just buy the part from Nissan and save some money? Better yet, have a look at what's available in the aftermarket scene because you might save even more cash. But the practicality concerns don't end there. Plenty of owners have complained about just a lack of space for all your crap. Look, granted, it does have really big door bins, but it's all hard, scratchy plastic, so things are going to rattle around. And the glove box is an okay size, and there's a net down here. But in the center console area, there's nowhere specifically to put your phone. The cup holder, look, this is okay if you're a wanker like me and drink small pretentious coffees, but anything larger than, say, an oat piccolo is going to go falling all over the place. This center bin in here is tiny for a vehicle in this class. No storage up here. There is a spot for sunglasses up here. Oh, what does Tony wear? He wears Carreras, very fashionable. But look, overall, yeah. For a ute that's supposed to be, a work vehicle or a family car, not enough practicality up front. Actually, you know what? If only Mercedes-Benz had used the Nissan Navara's center console, as well as most of the platform and plenty of the mechanicals, this would have been far easier to deal with. Also, no driver's side grab handle. I know it's only a small thing, but it's bloody annoying. Plus in the back seat, I'm exactly 5 centimeters taller than someone else that is associated with a form of X-Class, X-Men First Class star Michael Fassbender. This is in my driving position. I've got hardly any room back here. Compared to a Ranger, a Hilux, a Triton, I'm absolutely crammed in here. Also, the angle of the seat is almost 90 degrees, so I feel like I'm a kid in primary school waiting to go out for little lunch because I'm just like, we've got to sit up like this. Also, because the seat is raised compared to the front seats, my head, it's almost touching the ceiling in here. This wouldn't be a problem if you're shorter. If anything, if you're a bit shorter, it can give you some vision over the driver's head to see forward, so it might help with not getting car sick. But for me, this is a very uncomfortable place to be. But as far as features and practicality back here, got your own air vents, there's a power outlet there, some map pockets behind the seats. It does have door bins. How the hell do I get to them? I'd have to lose my leg to get to them. There's a little spot here that's specifically designed to collect all sorts of filth and dust and disgustingness. And that's about it for rear practicality. Plus a little bit of a common issue back here. Apparently the child door lock mechanism is known to fail. Super easy fix though. Jump on the owners groups and forums. There's plenty of tutorials there to show you how to fix that. But a really good feature, and it has nothing to do with Mercedes-Benz, this is all Nissan. The sliding rear window back here, genius move, especially if you have a canopy on the car and you have a dog in the back, that makes a world of difference. Actually, just on the canopies, quite a few owners have had issues with the genuine Mercedes-Benz canopies. And I say genuine Mercedes-Benz because it's actually made by EGR. But apparently the mechanisms can fail, the latches can play up, the little press button to unlock thing, it can also have all sorts of issues. And some owners are having just to maintain them all the time. But the issue here is that when some owners have had to try to get these problems resolved by Mercedes-Benz, the dealership won't fix it because it's an EGR canopy. But then when they've got in touch with EGR to fix it, well, they also won't fix it because apparently it's a genuine Mercedes-Benz item and it should be up to the dealership to fix it. But on top of that, plenty of owners have complained about some very underwhelming experiences from their Mercedes-Benz dealerships. But this is why, if you're going to be fitting aftermarket parts or they've already been fitted, they must be quality items. And look, for all that sort of stuff, we highly recommend checking out our mates at Automotive Superstore. We've added their link down below. We work with them all the time. They're legends, and they carry literally hundreds of thousands of different parts and accessories. And if you are fitting top-notch accessories to these things, you shouldn't have a problem at all. But if you do the opposite, well, it can just ruin your ownership experience. For example, thanks to it sharing its platform and suspension components with the Navara, there are plenty of lift kits and aftermarket suspension mods available for them. Just do us a favor and make sure they're actually legal. See, we know of stories where people have gone and bought a car that's got modifications fitted to it and they drive around and the thing's fine until they go to get it re-registered, and then they learn that technically the car's illegal and they can't get it re-registered. And then they have to go to the time and expense of returning it back to stock to go and get it re-registered again. Just don't fall for the trap of being that person. Worse still, if you have a crash when your vehicle's in that condition, well then your insurance can be null and void because your car wasn't roadworthy in the first place. And anyway, I'm not really sure why you'd want to change the suspension because the ride quality in this thing is fantastic. Even in the Navara it's based on, generally pretty good, but in this you can tell that there has been a Mercedes style of tune to it. I can't get over how good the ride quality is. It's fantastic. Basically, Mercedes have done a fantastic job at giving this thing a far more premium feel than the Navara that it's based on. And those impressions, they don't end there. I mean, look at this interior. Visually, it just exudes premium. Even the seats, so comfortable, good amount of adjustment. The overall ergonomics are nice. It would be nice if the steering wheel actually had some reach adjustment. It's purely up and down. That's a bit annoying, but visually nails it. Although, like plenty of other Mercedes models of late, there is a lot of plastic going on. Look, on the plus side of that, because there's so many hard plastics everywhere, you would expect this to be a very resilient interior. But if you're buying a Mercedes-Benz because you want lots of soft touch surfaces, yeah, not in the X-Class. Although, if you do leave these cars out in the sun, the leather like this can get extremely hard and scratchy and can actually start pulling away from the seat. Now, the other thing that isn't happening, and when you consider what these cost when new, it's ridiculous that it doesn't have these, there's just a lack of standard features. Equipment like climate control, front and rear parking sensors, a 6-speaker stereo, all things that you'll find standard in lower spec models of plenty of other utes were only available in higher spec X-Class or models that were heavily optioned. And look, obviously the higher up the X-Class food chain you go, you are going to find 360-degree cameras, larger screens and a whole bunch of other accoutrements. But no matter what model you're looking at, no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Plus, there are plenty of reports of Bluetooth connection issues and the entire system just having a few gremlins. But when it is working properly, this is an absolute joy to use. It's actually one of my favorite iterations of Mercedes-Benz Command infotainment systems. Really, really lovely. As are the steering wheel controls. It just works great. Although plenty of owners have complained that the native sat-nav in these just feels like a generation old. In saying that though, how many people actually use Car's native sat-nav these days? And even on the higher spec models with the 8-speaker stereos, yeah, apparently these don't sound all that great either. But look, the good news here is all of this stuff is so easily upgraded. If you want to keep the native screens, there are ways to include Apple CarPlay and Android Auto into the native system, or you can do what plenty of other owners recommended, which is just ditch all the standard equipment and fit aftermarket screens and maybe update the speakers while you're at it. Now, we've actually teamed up with our mates at Automotive Superstore to make a full video guide to all this sort of in-car entertainment stuff. The link for that video is down below. Check it out. And the exterior kind of continues that sense of premium until you scratch the surface, which might not be that hard because apparently the paint is quite thin and can mark easily, like so many other cars. But I'm going to call it right now. This is easily the best looking ute in its class. I adore how they look, especially when it's been modified perfectly like this. These wheels, white writing on the tires, can't get better. This bar, the whole black treatment, sexy as hell. And that might be because it barely shares any sheet metal with the Navara. But as hot as these look, just check all the roof channels for any signs of corrosion. Chances are you'll be fine. And also the bolts that hold the roof rails on, they can get a little bit loose, but really easy fix. And look, if you've watched any of our other videos, you might be expecting me to say that being a Mercedes, make sure you check anything that's powered by electricity to make sure it actually works. But on the X-Class, chances are it will work. These don't seem to suffer from too many electrical gremlins at all. Okay, there are a couple of incredibly rare reports that the power windows can kind of play up a little bit, or the car doesn't recognize the key, or the seat or the seatbelt sensors, or the seat adjustment electronics kind of playing up, or the HVAC system having a tantrum. But compared to plenty of other Mercedes vehicles that we've featured on the channel that can have major and unfortunately very common electronic concerns, in these, the electronic gremlins don't seem to be too much of an issue, although that sometimes can't be said for some of the safety features. It is lacking in a few safety features. There's no adaptive cruise control, there's no lane keep assist. And look, it's fantastic that this was the first ute in the market with autonomous emergency braking, but plenty of owners have complained that some of the calibrations are a bit off in some of the early models, like they just jump on the anchors when there's no need for it to in the first place. In saying that, a lot of these problems have been sorted with later software updates, so just get them done. Also, if the windscreen gets really, really dirty, or if it's absolutely pelting with rain, this can disable the AEB. You'll get a little warning on the dash telling you that. But to hopefully stop this from happening in the first place, maybe just ditch the OEM wiper blades, or if you've got some cheap aftermarket ones fitted, get rid of them. Instead, do what we do, which is use WiperTech wiper blades, because they are simply some of the best in the business. And when you get yourself a set via the link down below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Speaking of saving money, this is where the X-Class starts to become extremely attractive. Unless you bought one brand new. In that case, you're gonna wanna skip ahead a few seconds. Thanks to easily the worst depreciation in this segment, you can now pick up a 4-cylinder X-Class from as little as $20,000. And we're not talking about the base model X220D, we're talking about the X250D. That thing retailed for over $65,000 when new. That means these days they've lost, what, 70% of their value in just a few years? And look, obviously this can vary depending on, kilometers, condition, and the trim spec. And 4-cylinder X-Classes, they currently top out at around about $55,000. But when you compare this to the Navara that it's based on, a used X-Class can be significantly cheaper. And then when it comes to these 6-cylinder models, well, pricing for these kick off from as little as $25,000. That is nuts. We're talking a dual cab ute that retailed at around $80,000, even more than that when brand new. Imagine buying one for $80,000 and a few years later, you've lost 50,000 bucks. That's horrible. But pricing for mint condition, super low kilometer, final production run examples of the V6s, the asking prices are topping out at around about $80,000. If they're actually getting that is a whole different story though. But compared to pretty much every other dual cab ute in its class, on average, these things can lose around 50% of their value. But that means they offer so much vehicle for the money. Just remember, obviously, that depreciation might not stop or slow down, but in V6 form, my God, these things seem like an absolute bargain, especially when you consider just how wonderful they are to drive. This thing feels way more refined than plenty of other utes in this class, and it does kind of give you that sense that it is something special. That's what a Mercedes-Benz should do, and yeah, for a ute in this category, yeah, it nails it. In fact, compared to plenty of other Mercedes models that we've tested of late, This just feels so much more solid. There's no rattles, there's no creaks. There's this sense that there was genuine quality control when building it, which unfortunately can't be said for plenty of the other Mercs out there. And then we have this V6 engine, and okay, negatives first. There can be just the slightest hint of lag when you pull away from a standing start, but that apparently can be fixed with a throttle controller. And fun fact, and if you're a Ford Ranger Raptor owner, you're gonna hate hearing this, these are substantially faster in a straight line. This will do 0 to 100 in about 7.5 seconds. The Raptor is going to be trailing about 3 seconds behind you. But about the biggest compliment I can give this engine and transmission is it feels so flexible. Basically, no matter what scenario you're in, this power plant just suits it. And then flick through the different driving modes, and then you can sort of untap even more talent. Also, unlike plenty of other vehicles in this class, you can drive this in all-wheel drive mode all the time on a sealed surface. Don't do that in the 4-cylinder, that's rear-wheel drive on a sealed surface only, but because it is constant all-wheel drive, it just feels so secure on the road all the time. Actually, that translates to off-road as well. Both the 4 and the 6 cylinders have really good off-roading chops. We're not talking, hardcore rock crawling like a modified Jeep Wrangler, but they'll hold their own out in the wilderness. And then even when it comes to towing, look, the 4-cylinder, it does a decent job, but the V6, it's a bit of a powerhouse. The only potential problem is that if you're towing like seriously heavy weights, it can drop the ride height in the back and then lift it at the front, and that certainly does high speed stability like on the freeway no favors at all. And look, as we say, despite of what the rated towing figures are, if you're going to be towing something that's heavier than the tow vehicle itself, that's just asking for trouble. Speaking of trouble, what's the story with the mechanical reliability of these? Like, the Nissan engine's apparently ultra reliable, but then, Mercedes engines of late maybe don't have the best reputation for build quality and reliability. Unfortunately, I can't answer any of these questions because I'm not a qualified mechanic. Luckily, Jim is.
Now, the 2.3 is mostly okay if it hasn't been abused or neglected, and it's mostly the ancillaries and the emissions-related components that might give you trouble rather than the engine itself. Is that because it's a Nissan and Renault engine? Yeah, probably. Although the 2.3 in the X-Class does suffer from failed oil pumps, which can cause engine failure, and that is actually reported more in the X-Class than the Navara. And just like the Navara, they are prone to rear main oil seal leaking. That's a pretty common problem. And the turbo hot pipe, they nearly all leak. The O-rings often weep, and that just leaks oil, and when that leak gets bad enough, it starts leaking boost. That is a very common problem. The turbos themselves, look, they are prone to fail sometimes, usually with higher mileage examples, and especially ones that have been serviced poorly. The EGR flex pipe, that can crack, and when it does, it just spews exhaust soot all over the place, and sometimes the EGR valve mechanism just breaks and fails, and then you need to replace the whole EGR valve. That's a semi-common problem. The fuel injectors, they can get a bit rattly. Again, mostly really high mileage, and sometimes that rattle can lead to injector failure, and then you need to replace the injectors, which isn't cheap. That's usually about a $4,000-ish kind of job, which isn't too bad, and that's about on par with a lot of modern diesels. Now, the engine you've all been waiting for me to talk about, the V6. Most of the problems with the V6 happen right down in the valley of the V. They are prone to turbo failure. They do get quite hot, and the turbos can often have issues with their variable geometry wastegate or the boost control actuator in there. It just stops working properly, and the vehicle has a weird surging issue, and weirdly it doesn't actually log a fault code for that. Another issue in the V is the inlet pipe that goes onto the front of the turbo. That leaks oil, and when that leaks oil, it drips directly onto the actuator for the intake manifold swirl flaps, which makes that actuator fail, stops working, then all the linkages all clog up, and then the actuator linkages break, and the whole thing is just doesn't work at all. Mercedes will sell you very expensive parts of the inlet manifold, which are thousands, but thankfully you can buy rebuild kits for them, which is, significantly cheaper. Another issue down in that V is the oil cooler. Now, the oil cooler leaks externally, usually on these, where it bolts to the top of the engine, and when that leaks, it actually fills the V up with oil to the point where it goes out a little well-designed drain hole in the back of the V and dribbles down the back of the engine. The problem there is it's nearly always misdiagnosed as a leaking rear main oil seal. So if you have one and it's leaking oil, check down in that V. And like all modern diesels, they have their fair share of DPF complications and EGR valve issues. Just check with the DPF, and I say this all the time, make sure you haven't got another problem causing a DPF issue. That is usually the case. Now, the transmissions and drive lines in these are usually okay, with no one big, very common problem that takes them out. They actually do have a recommended service interval, which is good. None of this fill-for-life rubbish that other manufacturers have, although the intervals are stretched out a little bit. It's 80,000 Ks for the 4-cylinder and 120,000 Ks for the V6. Pro tip here is if you're towing or carrying heavy loads, I would recommend you halve those distances, and if you do, they will probably be okay. You know what, the same can be said for both of these engines. I know it sounds like a whole lot of doom and gloom, but basically, if you look after these things, typically they're okay. And they're certainly no worse than any other engine in any other comparative vehicle on the market.
And on top of all of that, if you're hell-bent on getting the things serviced at your local Mercedes-Benz dealership, well, prepare to pay some ridiculous and we think often unjustified premiums. We recommend doing what plenty of owners suggest and just get it serviced at an independent mechanic and potentially save yourself some money. But speaking of the dealerships, and look, I'm going to let you in on a bit of sort of behind-the-scenes information here. Anytime we feature a Mercedes-Benz on ReDriven, we reach out to a handful of very experienced Mercedes-Benz technicians. And according to them, the X-Class is easily one of the best built and least troublesome Mercedes-Benz models of recent times. Maybe that's because most of it isn't actually a Mercedes. But look, should you buy one of these? Okay, if it's the 4-cylinder and it's passed a pre-purchase inspection, yeah, you probably should. It's basically a better looking Navara wearing a fancy badge, and it could save you potentially thousands of dollars compared to what the equivalent Nissan might be asking. But what about these V6s? Should you buy one of these? It kind of depends. Look, if you can be 100% sure that it has been serviced ahead of schedule and has been thoroughly cared for, and look, that means being driven well beyond metro areas on a pretty regular basis, and it passes a thorough pre-purchase inspection, it's a cautious yes. Consider buying one. See, the problem is, so many of these have been purchased on some sort of a lease arrangement by people that have no intention of keeping the car for the long term. And we've found time and time again that can mean missed servicing and maintenance. Plus, if they've only ever driven the thing around built-up areas, this does the engine no favours. And this can result in mechanical issues, and with the V6 being really the one and only actual Mercedes-Benz part, it means the thing most likely to fail will also attract the most expensive repair bill. Look, these can seem to be absolute bargains on the used market, and many of them are, but please don't make the mistake of buying one that's going to break your heart and potentially your wallet. Actually, you know what? If all this seems far too risky, just buy one of these instead. Plenty of owners have complained about just a lack of here we go. But good news, this is relatively easy to fix, and I've instantly gone blank on the rest of it. And look, it's awesome that these, like the Volkswagen, your insurance can end up being null and void due to